Greetings, everyone. Thank you for joining the call, and thank you, Jennifer, for the introduction. And it was a pleasure to work with you on that national board so many years ago, and to be in contact through your time as mayor and county commissioner and important fights, including the fight on climate. I thought I would just start by noting how phenomenal this time is. Could we ever have imagined? We start with the dark and dangerous times associated with, from my viewpoint, what is an incompetent executive branch that has put us at risk time and time again before this crisis. And then you throw in the pandemic, and then you throw in the economic implosion, and it's just like reading an Armageddon novel. And we wake up, we go, is this really all happening right now? And it is, which is why these types of calls and communication are so important, as we try to find our way through this uncharted territory. The bill that Rashida was so instrumental in working on in the House has a lot of good things in it. And you think about the fundamentals for family. You have food, you have shelter, you have utilities. And let me just start there and note that that bill has a 15% increase in SNAP benefits, very important. My state of Oregon is one of the hungriest in the nation, really important. On shelter, it has $100 billion for rental assistance so people can help make their rent payments, and $75 billion to help people make their mortgage payments so that they don't end up in foreclosure. So it's fighting eviction, it's fighting foreclosure. And then turning to utilities, which aren't thought about so much, and it was really a pleasure to partner with Rashida, and she emphasized the role of water. The House bill takes a even broader viewpoint of water, electricity, and broadband. And think about how essential broadband is if you're looking for work, if you're trying to communicate with friends and stay in touch, if you're a student who is now having to go to school over broadband. And it highlights the enormous inequities we have in our country. Families are not all the same, even before you get to the issue of affluence. So there's structure in some families that will help students study. There is less structure in others. There are funds in some families that mean that they have broadband and they have the equipment, others don't. So in that bill is a fund for connectivity that will help folks who have the availability of broadband but can't afford it get connected with the equipment, the initial setup, and then paying monthly fees through September 2021. So to the House, really well done on those essential utility connections. And that a broader coalition on moratorium on utility shutoffs, more than 800 groups. It's one of the largest grassroots assemblages I've ever seen. So that is terrific. Testing and tracing to take us out of this nightmare, a foundation on the healthcare side. A lot of support for that. Our state and local governments, $500 billion for our state governments and $350 billion for our local governments, and support for tribes and support for territories. So this shouldn't be an issue at all, because normally my Republican colleagues are saying, well, any government that's closer to the people is one we should support, and state government is closer than the federal government. But we have Mitch McConnell over here leading the Senate saying, you know what, we'll just let the states go bankrupt. And it's like, where is that coming from? And part of it seems to be an effort to reinforce the argument that government is the enemy, so why support them? Let them go bankrupt. I think in the end, though, I think it's more about bargaining over getting help for the mega corporations while we're fighting for help for state and local government. And that's really disturbing because there is this make the rich richer, make the powerful more powerful theme to the way that my colleagues across the aisle have been acting, including in the last bill, Corona 3.5, tucked in at the last second by the chair of the Finance Committee, which is the tax committee, and by the majority leader, was $175 billion and more tax cuts for the richest Americans. Mm-hmm. So let's get that $175 billion back. And guess what? In the House bill, they get it back. So that is great. And that's the same amount they're spending on fighting foreclosures and evictions on the housing side. So that's a good movement of that $175 billion from a place that isn't needed to a place it's desperately needed. I wanted to mention two things that are not in the House bill that I'm very concerned about. One is a guaranteed access to an absentee ballot in November. And that access should exist for everyone. Oregon has had vote by mail forever, and there is a bill for full vote by mail that Amy Klobuchar of Minnesota and Ron Wyden from my state are championing, and I'm partnering with them, but they are the leads. And I have a backup plan that is much simpler plan that says every ballot program, open that up in this coming November election to anyone who wants an absentee ballot, a no excuse absentee ballot program. The infrastructure is already there. It can be amplified. We can provide financial assistance to amplify it, but nobody should have to worry about going to the polls and getting an infection this coming November. It is part of a broader philosophical battle. We have seen since the Supreme Court gutted the Voting Rights Act that one party has said, well, let's pursue all kinds of voter suppression and voter intimidation tactics because there's people we don't want to vote. We don't want college students to vote. We don't want poor people to vote. We don't want communities of color to vote. That philosophy is so at odds with the view of government of, by, and for the people. But if you're powerful, you don't want those groups voting. And so we've got this whole voter suppression movement, and the last thing they want is to make it easier for people to cast a ballot. So this issue over being able to vote safely in November is part of a bigger battle, not just over voting access, but over the issue of gerrymandering and over the issue of dark money in politics. And there is a bill that is in the House that passed the House called H.R. 1. It's For the People Act, and it takes on gerrymandering and voter suppression and dark money and ethics. Here in the Senate, Tom Udall of New Mexico is the pilot. I'm the co-pilot on it. Tom's retiring, so I'm using every possible forum to say, hear those words, for the people, and think about how is the Senate going to pass that act to try to restore, take on the corruption that's inhabiting our electoral system. Because if we don't take on that corruption, we're going to lose on healthcare, housing, education, living wage jobs, Equality Act, taking on climate crisis and other environmental issues. So it's kind of the foundation. It's the first thing we should do in January 2021 if we have a majority that is ready to take on the rigged system. We have to unrig it the moment we have an opportunity to do so. The second thing that's not in the House bill is the Rewind Act. An effort to say this crisis should not be used as a moment to give more subsidies to the fossil fuel world. Instead, we should be driving a transition to renewable energy. This year, yesterday it was announced that this year is the first year that the energy from renewable energy, specifically hydro, wind, and solar being the big versions of that, will exceed the electricity generated by coal. So coal is no longer king. And part of that is the environmental consciousness over climate, and part of it is the blessing that solar and wind have become cheaper than fossil fuels. And we have to really be aware of the fact that natural gas is not a solution to climate, that it produces a lot of methane leakage that does as much damage to the climate as coal does. So we've got a long ways to go. Anyway, so that's the big vision. I hope we can find a way to push on this issue of transition, using these massive resources we're investing now to transition rather than anchor ourselves in the fossil fuel world. And so with that, let me turn it back over to Jennifer and the team.
I'm Egberto Willies, host of Politics Done Right, an independent news program. I post several news videos of interest every day. I ask you so kindly to subscribe to my channel, and please leave me some comments. Thank you very much.